Welcome back to Inside the Philippines. If this is your first time here, this is the channel where we sit down with the men who came here chasing something. Love, retirement, a second act, and hear what it actually cost them. Today's story belongs to Murray Kowalchuk, 61 years old, from Oshawa, Ontario, just east of Toronto. 38 years as a scaffolder. Union man, Local 721, the kind of guy who spent 4 decades hanging steel off the side of refineries and condo towers in weather that would put most of us indoors. He fell twice in his career. Walked away from both. Murray came to the Philippines in October, and he wants us to tell you right at the top that his story doesn't start in a bar. He'll say that a few times before we're done. It matters to him. What we can tell you is that the woman in this story never told him a lie he can prove. Not one. Everything she said about herself was true, and everything she asked for was real. And that's exactly what makes this one difficult to shake off. There's no moment where a villain reveals herself. There's just a slow accumulation, over 2 years, of things that all made sense on their own. Murray is a careful man. Physically careful. You don't survive 38 years on scaffold by being reckless. But he'll be the first to tell you that being careful on a job site and being careful with your own life are 2 completely different skills, and he only ever learned one of them. There's a question he never asked. One question, 2 years, and he never asked it once. He'll get to it at the end. Here's his story, in his own words. I'm going to start with the doctor's appointment, because that's really where it starts. Everything before that was just work. February, cold one, that year. I'd been getting this tightness going up the stairs at the Union Hall. Nothing dramatic, just felt like I'd been holding my breath. Told myself it was the cold. Guy my size, 61, you get used to things not working right, and you file it under getting old. My GP sent me for a stress test, and then the stress test sent me to Lake Ridge Health, and there's a cardiologist there, young fella, maybe 40, who put my angiogram up on a screen and talked me through it. Didn't sugarcoat it. Blood pressure was bad, cholesterol was bad, my dad went at 64, and I was doing exactly nothing about any of it. He said if nothing changed, I probably had 5 good years. Maybe fewer. The whole thing took 11 minutes. I know that because I looked at my phone when I went in, and I looked at it again in the truck. And I sat in that parking lot for about 40 minutes. Not crying or anything, just sitting. Radio off. There was a woman 2 spots over, trying to get a car seat out of a Corolla, and I watched her do it for the whole 40 minutes. Here's the thing I want to be honest about, because I've had a while to think about it now. I wasn't scared. That surprised me. I've been up on a hanging scaffold in 40-kilometer wind. I've had a plank go on me. I know what scared feels like, and that wasn't it. What I felt was embarrassed, because I did the math right there in the truck. 38 years. Sarnia shutdowns, 21 days on. Sleeping in a comfort inn with 3 other guys' work boots stinking up the room. The GM plant before they wound her down. Every Christmas I worked, because it was double time, and I figured I'd catch the next one. Every summer weekend, same thing. And what did I have? A bungalow. That's it. That's the whole list. Debbie left in '09. I'm not going to dress that up. She didn't leave for anyone. She just left. And honestly, I'd have left me too. I was never home, and when I was home, I wasn't much company. My daughter's out in Calgary. She texts at Christmas and on my birthday, and I text her back, and that's about the size of it. That's on me as well. So there I am, 61 years old, and a guy in a lab coat has just told me I've got maybe 5 good ones, and I'm sitting in a parking lot realizing that later was a story I'd been telling myself since about 1987. I put the house up in April, bought it in '94 for $94,000, sold it to a developer for a number I still don't like saying out loud because it makes me sound like I did something clever. And I didn't do anything. I just happened to own dirt in the wrong decade. After the realtor and the lawyer and the capital gains, which I did not fully understand, still don't, I cleared just over $210,000, and I put it in my checking account. Yeah, no, I know. Every person I've told that to makes a face. But I've never trusted a guy in a suit who wants to hold my money for me. And nobody ever taught me what else you're supposed to do with it. So there it sat. 210 grand in a checking account earning about $11 a year. Now, Ronnie Boisvert. Ronnie worked with me on the Nanticoke shutdowns going back to the 90s. Loud guy, terrible scaffolder, decent human being. He'd retired to Angeles City about 4 years before all this, and he was one of those fellas who posts everything on Facebook. Him at a pool, him eating something on a stick, him with a beer at 11 in the morning, 31 degrees, and me scraping the windshield of a Ranger in a Canadian Tire parking lot. I want to be clear that I wasn't sitting there thinking about women. I really wasn't. I was thinking about heat. I was thinking about walking somewhere without 4 layers on. The cardiologist had told me to move more, and I'd looked at 6 months of Ontario winter and thought, well, that's not happening here. So I called him. First time in maybe 2 years. He gave me the whole pitch. Cheap, English everywhere, good hospitals, better than Thailand because you can actually talk to people. Then he said, come for a month. What's a month? That's it. That's the whole recruitment. What's a month? I booked the flight myself, which I want on the record, because I'd never booked a flight in my life. Debbie used to do it. Before Debbie, my mother did it. I sat at the kitchen table in a house I'd already sold, with the boxes stacked in the front room, and I spent about 90 minutes on the Air Canada site, and I still managed to book the return leg out of the wrong airport. October 14th. Pearson, 1 suitcase, because I'd gotten rid of everything else. And I remember standing at the gate thinking I'd never in my life gone anywhere without knowing exactly what I was going to be doing when I got there. Every job, every shutdown, 38 years. Somebody hands you a drawing and you build what's on the drawing. Nobody handed me a drawing for this one. I figured I'd wing it. How hard could it be? Clark, at 11:30, at night, and I still remember stepping out of the terminal doors, and it was like somebody opened an oven. 30 degrees. At night. My glasses fogged, and I stood there for a second like a jackass with my 1 suitcase. Ronnie was in the lot, in a white high-ace van with the windows down, waving both arms, and the first thing he said to me, not hello, not how was the flight, was, you got fat, Kowalchuk. Which, fair. The drive into Angeles City took maybe 20 minutes, and it was the strangest 20 minutes of my life up to that point. Motorcycles everywhere. Not 1 or 2, swarms of them. 6 inches off the bumper. Whole families on 1 seat. A guy with a sheet of plywood balanced across his knees. Jeepneys with chrome horses on the hood, belching black diesel. And the smell, which I still can't properly describe. Barbecue smoke and drains and something sweet underneath it all, like fruit going off. It's not a bad smell. It's just a lot of smell. Ronnie had a place in a walled subdivision off Friendship Highway. 2 bedrooms, tile floors, a fan that ticked, guard at the gate who saluted the van every single time, which I never got used to. Roosters started at 4 in the morning. I want you to understand that nobody warns you properly about the roosters. Ronnie said they get used to you. They don't. You get used to them, and even then, not really. First 2 weeks were Ronnie's Philippines, which turned out to be 3 bars and 6 guys. Same 3 bars. Same 6 guys. Every afternoon around 4, sometimes earlier. There was a Brit named Dennis, retired postie, been there 11 years. A Kiwi called Terry, with a bad hip. A big American fella, Gene, who talked about his ex-wife's lawyer so often I could have picked the man out of a lineup. And 2 others whose names I honestly can't recall now. Which tells you something, and they all had the same conversation. Every day. Rotating. The warnings came out early. Second night, I think. Dennis leaning over a San Miguel telling me about a guy in Balibago who built a house for a girl and got locked out of it. Gene with his story about the sister who needed surgery 3 separate times. Same sister, same surgery. Terry with the one about the fella who found out his fiancé had 2 other blokes on the go, one German and one from Manchester, all 3 sending money on the 1st of the month like a payroll. I heard every single one of those stories in my first fortnight. Every one. And I sat there nodding and thinking, yeah, that's rough. And never once thinking it had anything to do with me, because those were stories about men who met women in bars, and I was not going to be doing that. There were 2 other guys, mind you. Different ones. One of them was a Dutchman, Wim, married 18 years, and he came by once and had 1 drink and left because his wife's nephew was graduating. Other one was an Aussie, whose name I never got, who came in maybe twice the whole time and mostly listened. Both of them seemed all right. Both of them seemed happy. Neither of them talked much. I noticed that. Filed it under nothing. Thing is, I'm not a bar guy. Never really was. And after February, I was less of one. Doctor had me on 2 pills and a lecture, and I'd cut the beer right down. I'd have one and nurse it for an hour and a half while Ronnie went through 6. And the bars in Angeles, I don't need to explain those to you if you've been. Girls in matching outfits, music too loud, someone always coming over to sit down. I found it uncomfortable. Not morally. I'm not going to stand here at 61 and pretend I'm a saint. Just uncomfortable. The way you're uncomfortable at a party where everyone knows the rules except you. So I started walking in the afternoons. Malls, mostly. That's the honest reason. They're air-conditioned, and the sidewalks outside aren't sidewalks. They're a suggestion. Doctors said 30 minutes a day minimum, and I'd been counting steps on my phone like an idiot since April. So I'd get dropped at SM Clark or Marquee, and I'd do laps. Ground floor, escalator, 2nd floor, back down. 45 minutes. Then I'd sit in the food court and have a coffee and watch people, because I had absolutely nothing else to do and only so many laps in me. That's where it happened. A Saturday. And I'm going to say this now, and I'll probably say it again before we're done. It wasn't a bar. The food court at SM Clark on a Saturday is a zoo. School kids, whole families, 3 generations at one table sharing 2 meals. Every seat taken. I had a 4-top to myself, which I felt guilty about, and I was working through a bowl of something from the Chinese place and reading nothing, just sitting. And this woman comes over with a tray and asks if she can sit. Now. I actually looked over my shoulder. I want that on the record because it's the truest thing in this whole story. I physically turned around to see who she was talking to. She laughed at me for that. Which was, yeah, Joanna May. Gem, everyone called her. 29. And I'm not going to do the thing where I describe her, because it doesn't matter. and it sounds stupid coming from a man my age. But I'll tell you, she was the sort of good-looking where other people at other tables noticed her sitting down with me. I felt that. I felt it the whole 40 minutes. She had a paperback with her. Some romance thing with a bent cover. And a work ID clipped to her blouse. Dental clinic on Stone Rosario. Receptionist. Her photo on it looking about 17. We talked for 40 minutes. She asked about Canada. Asked whether it's true you can throw hot water in the air and it turns to snow, which I've never actually tried. And I said yes anyway. Asked about the mining in Sudbury. Asked if I had children, and I said one, a daughter, Calgary. And she asked her name, and how old, and whether we were close. And I said not as close as I'd like, and she just nodded and didn't make a face about it. I asked her nothing. Nothing useful, anyway. Where she was from? Negros, a barangay outside Bacolod. She'd been in Angeles 2 years. What she did. Whether the halo was any good. I didn't ask if she was married. Didn't ask if she had a boyfriend. Didn't ask if she had kids. 3 questions. Would have taken 90 seconds. And here's the bit I chewed on for 2 years afterward, like a dog with a bone. She paid for her own halo. Her own tray, her own money, counted out coins. I didn't offer. She didn't hint. It never came up. That receipt got a lot of mileage. Whenever something later on didn't sit right, I'd go back and put that on the scale. She paid for her own halo, as if that settled something. At the end, she gave me her number without me asking. Wrote it on the back of a Mercury drug receipt. Then she said she works Tuesday through Saturday, so if I message in the evening. Tuesday through Saturday. A schedule. A real job with real hours. That landed on me as proof. I'm telling you honestly, that's how I took it. Proof of something. Not information. Proof. We arranged to meet the following Wednesday. I told Ronnie about it that night, and he did this thing with his eyebrow, just the one, and said, "Food court, eh?" and went back to his beer. And I said, well, it wasn't a bar. Wednesday was a place called Yellow Cab on Fields Avenue, which she picked, and she ordered the cheapest thing on the menu and made me split a pizza I didn't want. I'd offered to take her somewhere better. She said, no, this is fine, and it was fine, and that was that. Then it was 11 weeks. I want to sit on that number for a second because it's the whole thing, really. 11 weeks of seeing that woman 2-3 times a week. And in 11 weeks, she did not ask me for 1 peso. Not a phone load, not a jeepney fare. Nothing. I've told that to people since, and you can see them waiting for the but. There isn't one. That part's true. Whatever else went sideways, that part's true. She lived in a walk-up off Stone Rosario, 3rd floor. No elevator. One of those buildings where the stairwell smells like wet cement and somebody's fabric softener. Landlady on the ground floor, an older woman, hair dyed that flat black, sat by the gate all day, watching a little TV. First time I came by, she gave me a proper going over. Asked my name, asked what I did, asked where I was staying. Then she'd say, "Good morning, Sir Murray," every time after that. Sir Murray. Never got used to that either. The clinic was real. I want to be specific because this is the part that did most of the work on me. Dental clinic on the 2nd floor above a Mercury drug. 2 chairs. A dentist named Doc Ninny, who was maybe 45 and permanently frazzled. I went there twice. Once because Jem asked me to pick her up, and once because I actually had a filling go on me. Doc Ninny knew my name by the 2nd visit. Made a joke about Canadian teeth. I sat in the waiting room with the aircon dripping into a bucket and watched Jem file charts and answer the phone and deal with a mother whose kid wouldn't open his mouth. You can't fake that. That's what I thought, sitting there. You cannot fake a job. And she's right. That's true. You can't. But having a real job doesn't tell you anything about the rest of a person's life, and I never worked that out because I wasn't actually testing her. I was collecting things that let me stop testing. I'd read the forums before I came. Everybody does. I had a whole list in my head of what a scam looks like. She'll avoid video calls. Her stories won't line up. There'll be an emergency in the first month. She won't want you to meet anyone. She'll rush it. That was my checklist. And Jem failed every item on it, meaning she passed, meaning I ticked them off one at a time like a pre-shift inspection. Except I wrote the checklist. That's the bit that took me 2 years to see. I made up the test, and then I graded her on it, and then I acted like the test came from somewhere official. Nobody ever asks the other question, which is not, is she lying? It's what does she want? And is she going to say it out loud? And if not, why not? Anyway, Sundays were Mass. Holy Rosary in the middle of Angelus, the big pink one with the twin towers. Packed out, doors open, people standing in the street, and it's about 34 degrees in there with ceiling fans doing absolutely nothing. Half of it in Tagalog, and I understood none of it. And I stood up and sat down whenever everyone else did, about half a beat late every time. I'm from Sudbury, Ukrainian Catholic on my dad's side, which meant Easter and funerals. I hadn't been inside a church since my mother's in 2003. But I'll tell you, I found it comforting. Sat there sweating in a golf shirt and found the whole thing steadying. She introduced me to one of the priests after. Father Arnell, young guy, shook my hand, asked how long I was staying. It felt like being vouched for, like a reference. She told me things in that stretch, and I remember most of them. Eldest of 5. Father died when she was 19. Some kind of infection that started as nothing. Mother's name is Norma, has diabetes, takes insulin when they can get it. 2 younger sisters, Rochelle and a younger one still in school, and a brother, Jason, 24, who couldn't find work. And every month, first week, she'd sit there with her phone and do the arithmetic, right in front of me. Rent, her transport, her load. And then whatever was left went to Negros through Gcash. I watched her do it in a chowking once with a bowl of congee going cold. She made maybe $17,000 a month at the clinic. That's about 400 Canadian. And 8 of it went home. $400 a month. I did more than that in a day when the shutdowns were on. She used a phrase with me over lunch one time. Utang na loob. Debt of the inside, near enough. She was explaining why she couldn't say no to an aunt about something, and she said it like you'd say the weather. Not a burden she was complaining about. Just what is. I learned Kano off her too. That's what I was. Kano. Comes with a number attached whether you like it or not. Her cousin had a baptism in November, and I went along and stood at the back in a shirt with a collar. And afterwards, she told me her mother had told everyone in the barangay that her daughter's Canadian friend came. Just that. That he came. Made their month, she said. That did something to me. I'm not going to pretend it didn't. I extended my visa in November. Then again in December. You just go to the immigration office on the corner near the old Nepo. Take a number. Sit for 2 hours with everybody else. Pay your 3,000 odd, and they stick a sticker in. Nothing to it. I told Ronnie I was staying because it was cheaper than heating a house through an Ontario winter. Which is true. It is true. I've found that's how I lie. I say something true so I don't have to say the actual thing. Then in January, she lost hours at the clinic. Doc Ninny's landlord put the rent up and something had to give, and Jem went from 6 days to 3. She didn't tell me for 2 weeks. I found out because I turned up on a Thursday to pick her up, and she wasn't there. And I offered. I want to be careful here, because this is where people stop listening properly. I offered. She did not ask. I brought it up in a Jollibee on MacArthur. I'd had 2 cups of that terrible coffee, and I'd been working up to it for a day and a half. And I said I'd like to help. $25,000 a month. About 600 Canadian. She said no. Said it twice. Said she'd find another job. Said it's not right. And she got a bit sharp about it, which I'd never seen from her. I pushed. I actually pushed. Told her it was less than a week of overtime to me, which it was, and told her it would make me feel useful. That's the true word. Useful. That's what I was buying. Not her. 38 years of being the guy who knew how to do the thing, and then 11 minutes in an office and a house sold, and a checking account with 200 grand in it doing nothing, and I was 61 and useless. She said yes, in the end. And I've thought about this 100 times. For 2 years, the memory I kept was her saying no. Twice. Sharp about it. That's the clip I played back whenever something didn't sit right. I never once kept the part where she said yes. I added the apartment in February. Pay $18,000 a month, about 430, nicer building, gate, guard. So call it 1,000 Canadian a month, all in. Then I flew home to Oshawa for 6 weeks to close out the last of my affairs. Bank, mail, the storage unit. 6 weeks. Gray the whole time. I sat in a rented room in Whitby with the heat clicking on and off, and I didn't speak to another human being except at the Tim Hortons drive-thru. Longest 6 weeks of my life. I came back on the 15th of February, and she met me at the arrivals door at Clark with a little cardboard sign with my name spelled wrong, 2 R's in Murray. She'd done it on purpose. Thought that was the funniest thing in the world. We moved in together that same month. The place I'd been paying for anyway. The one with the gate and the guard. So it wasn't really a decision so much as me stopping paying for a second bed. And here's what I need to say before I say anything else, because if I don't say it now, it'll get buried under everything that comes after. I was happy. Not in a stupid way. Not honeymoon nonsense. Ordinary happy, the kind where you don't think about it much. 6 months of it, February through August. Mornings I'd walk. Out the gate at 6:30 before it got vicious, down past the sorry, where the woman would say, "Good morning, sir," past the basketball court, where there were kids playing at 6 in the morning and again at 9 at night, and I never once saw that court empty. 6, 7 kilometers. Home by 8, dripping. Then I'd cook. I'd never cooked. 38 years of Sarnia motel microwaves and whatever Debbie put in front of me. Jem taught me adobo, and I got decent at it. And she taught me sinigang, and I never got that right. Too sour or not sour enough, she'd make a face and eat it anyway. Evenings there was karaoke coming over the wall from the neighbors every night, always the same 3 songs, and one of them was My Way, which apparently is a whole thing over there. I got so I could sleep through it. Went back to Doc Ninny in April for a checkup she talked me into. Blood pressure was 130/82. It had been 160-something in Oshawa. I stood there in that little room above the mercury drug with the aircon dripping into its bucket, and I thought, well, the cardiologist got what he asked for. 18 pounds off by June. So when people ask me, was it all a lie? That's the part one get stuck on. It wasn't. There's a version of this where I stop the story right there in June, and it's a nice story. Month 5, we went to Negros. Flight to Bacolod, then a van, then about 40 minutes on a road that stopped being a road somewhere along the way. Sugar cane both sides, taller than the van. Then the barangay, maybe 60 houses, half concrete and half nipa and bamboo, tin roofs, a shared pump at the end where 3 women were doing washing at 10 in the morning. Chickens absolutely everywhere. Dogs asleep in the middle of the track, wouldn't move for a vehicle. Their house was 3 rooms, 7 people in it. I counted twice because I didn't believe it the first time. I'd brought a balikbayan box. Ronnie had told me to, and I'd nodded and thought I'd sorted it. Chocolates, some Canadian tea towels, soap, a few t-shirts, couple of bottles of Old Spice. Cost me maybe $200, and I was pleased with myself. They opened it in front of everyone, and they were lovely about it. Perfectly lovely. "Thank you, Po. Thank you, sir." And I watched Norma's face do a thing for about a quarter of a second before she covered it, and I understood, not right then, but on the van back, that I'd got it wrong. Undercooked it. That box was supposed to be twice that size, and it was supposed to have things in it for people I hadn't met. Norma cried when she met me, held both my hands and said something in Hiligaynon, and Jem said she's blessing you. Diabetic. A foot that wasn't right, 62 and looked 75. She never once asked me for anything directly. Not one time, that whole first trip. Rochelle photographed me constantly. That's the sister, 26. Me eating. Me sitting. Me standing next to the pump like a prize marrow. All of it straight onto Facebook. And I want to be honest about what was going on there, because it took me a long time to see it, and longer to say it without sounding bitter. I was the first foreigner most of those people had ever had in their house. And by the time we left 3 days later, the whole street knew. Neighbors came by. A woman brought a plate of something over just to have a look at me. Jem's family went up in the world that weekend, and I could see it happening in real time, and I thought it was hospitality. Both things were true. That's the part nobody tells you. They were genuinely kind to me. Genuinely. And I was also a piece of furniture that made the house look better. Nobody in that barangay would ever say those 2 things out loud in the same sentence. They wouldn't need to. Everybody there already knew. I didn't know. I was too busy being made a fuss of. Then it started. Not fast. Not obvious. June. A niece's tuition, $9,000, 200 and change in real money. I'd have found that in the truck's console back home. July, the roof. Rainy season had got in one corner, and the whole back section wanted redoing. $22,000, call it 530 Canadian. Jem told me about it as a problem, not a request. She said it like she was worrying out loud. I offered. I always offered. I want you to notice that, because I certainly did at the time. I made a lot of that. Nobody's asking me. I'm offering. Therefore, this is fine. August. Fiesta in the barangay, and everyone contributes, and the Kano contributes more, so P15,000 for a pig and the tent. Then a baptism where they asked me to stand as Ninong, Godfather. I said yes, because it seemed like an honor, and it is an honor, and what nobody explained to me. And honestly, why would they? Everyone there already knows, is that being a Ninong isn't a Sunday afternoon. It's for life. That kid's school shoes are my business now. Christmas is my business. That's the deal I signed up for, standing in a church in a borrowed shirt, smiling at a camera. By September, I was doing about $45,000 a month all in, around 1,100 Canadian. My CPP hadn't kicked in yet, and the union pension was covering maybe half of it, and the rest came out of the checking account, which was fine. 1,100 a month is fine. It's what it turned into that wasn't. There were things in that stretch I noticed and did nothing with. She'd take some calls outside. On the balcony, door shut. Not every call. Some. And I'd think, she's speaking Hiligaynon to her mother, And she knows I can't follow it anyway. Why would she care where she stands? There was a cousin who kept coming up. Money for this cousin's situation. And in 8 months, I never met the cousin. There was a clinic form on the counter one time, some PhilHealth thing, and her birth year on it wasn't the one that matched 29. I looked at it for maybe 4 seconds. Filipino paperwork's a mess. Everyone says so. Forms get filled out wrong all the time. And Rochelle, in the barangay, mentioned Jem being in Manila in 2019. Some hospital thing. And Jem said, no, that wasn't me. That was Tita somebody. And Rochelle went quiet in a way that I clocked and immediately unclocked. Everybody's got a past. That's what I told myself. And I told myself it in a very particular way, which was, I've got a past, I've got a wife who walked out, and a kid who texts twice a year. And I would not enjoy being asked about it. So, I don't ask. That's not respect. I dressed it up as respect for 2 years. It's just cowardice with better manners. The other thing was Jason, the brother, 24, sat on the step most of the day on his phone. And I noticed him watching. Money came in through his sister, went to his mother, went out to the aunties and the nieces, and the tuition and the roof, and none of it went anywhere near him, and he watched every peso of it go past. He barely spoke to me, shook my hand once, the first day, and that was about it. Ronnie picked us up from the airport when we came back from Bacolod that first time. Did that for me a few times. He had the van. And I was going on about the barangay, and the pump, and the pig. And he was quiet for a bit. And then he said, "You buying a girlfriend, or buying a village?" Laughed. I laughed. Told him to mind his own business. He put the radio on. I never forgot it. Not for 1 day of the following year and a half. Which tells you I knew, doesn't it? Somewhere down at the bottom, I knew. The call came at 4:10 in the morning, first week of September. Phone going on the nightstand, and Jem sitting bolt upright talking fast in Hiligaynon, and I'm lying there in the dark, waiting. Her mother. Gallbladder. They'd taken her into the hospital in Bacolod, and they wouldn't start anything until there was a deposit down. We were on the 7 o'clock flight to Bacolod that same morning. Cebu Pacific, P4600 for the two of us, because it was last minute, and Jem didn't speak for the whole hour and a bit. The hospital was one of the private ones in Bacolod, which matters, because the public one would have been free, and would also have had her mother in a corridor. Corporate desk on the ground floor, and you don't get a scalpel near you until the deposit's cleared. That's not a scam, by the way. That's just how it works there. Everybody knows it, except the fella who's just flown in from Ontario. Deposit was P60,000. Final bill came to 185,000 once you counted the surgeon, the anesthetist, 4 nights, and the medicines you go and buy yourself from the pharmacy downstairs because the ward doesn't stock them. About 4,400 Canadian. I paid it. I paid it at the counter with my Scotiabank card, and I want to be extremely clear about something here because a lot of these stories go a particular way, and this bit doesn't. That money was real. I saw the invoices. I saw the gallbladder in a jar, which I could have done without. I sat in that corridor for 9 hours on a plastic chair with a bit of aircon and no signal. And I watched Jem hold her mother's hand and pray in Hiligaynon with her eyes shut. And there was nothing performed about any of it. Nobody was doing that for my benefit. If I'd been asked to pay it twice, I'd have paid it twice. I'd still pay it now, knowing everything I know. That's not the part that went wrong, but it changed the physics of the thing. That's the bit I couldn't have told you at the time. Because, before that, money was individual events, a roof, a tuition. After that, there was a category. There was now a thing called what Murray does when something happens. Nobody said that out loud. Nobody needed to. By the time we flew back to Angeles, in the third week of September, I'd spent about 12,000 Canadian on that family, all in, since February. The house came at Sunday lunch, month 10, October. And it wasn't Jem. I want that on record too, because it matters, and I've had 2 years to get it straight in my head. It was Norma, sitting at the table with the rice and the fried fish and the fan going, and she said it in Hiligaynon, and Jem translated, and she said the family has land, and land is nothing without a house, and if there is a house, then when Murray is old, there is somewhere for Murray. Security. That was the word that came through the translation. Security for everybody, including you. And Jem said, in English, straight to me, you don't have to. Mama, he doesn't have to. That's the thing about how it's done. Nobody asks. If nobody asks, nobody can be refused. And if nobody's refused, nobody loses face. The proposal just sits on the table next to the fish and waits for you to pick it up. I picked it up. Now, foreigners cannot own land in the Philippines. Full stop. I knew that. It's on every forum. It's in every video. Ronnie told me twice. You can own a condo unit in a building that's less than 40% foreign-owned, and that is it. That's the whole list. Land. Never. So the land was Norma's. Family land, been theirs a long time, and the title on it was one of those provincial situations where it's technically in her late husband's mother's name still, and everybody just knows whose it is. We went to a lawyer in Bacolod, office above a photocopy shop, aircon unit, framed diploma. Nice fella, maybe 50. He drew it on a pad for me. A lease, 25 years, renewable another 25, my name on the lease, house built on Norma's land, and something about usufruct, which he said 3 times, and which I could not repeat back to you now under oath. And I nodded along. 38 years I've read drawings, 38 years of load calculations and tie patterns, and knowing exactly what's holding what up. Give me an engineer's drawing for a hanging scaffold off the side of a coker unit, and I'll tell you in 90 seconds if it's wrong. I sat in that office and did not understand 1 page of what I was signing, and I signed it anyway, because asking a second time in front of Jem and her mother felt rude. That's it. That's the reason. It felt rude. Budget was P1.6 million, around 38,000 Canadian. Final cost, 20 months later, P2.4 million, 57,000. I'll tell you where the 800 grand went, because it's not mysterious, and it wasn't theft, mostly. Cement went up. That's real. Everybody's cement went up that year. Then the redesign, original plan was a bungalow, and somewhere around month 4, it became 2 stories, because there should be a room upstairs for when your daughter visits. Which, yeah, my daughter has never been to the Philippines and has no plans to go, and they knew her name, and they built her a room. And I didn't say a word, because what am I going to say? Then a perimeter wall, because you have to have a wall. Then a gate, because the wall needs a gate. Then a water tank on the roof. And the crew. The crew were cousins and second cousins, and a nephew. And they did 6 weeks of work in about 4 months. Rainy days off. Fiesta week off. 3 of them disappeared to a sugar harvest for a fortnight without telling anyone. I tried to manage it. Once. I went down for 11 days in month 14, and I did what I have done every working day of my life, which is turn up early, look at what's happening, and say that's not right. Do it this way. The rebar spacing in the second-floor slab was wrong. It was genuinely wrong. I'm not making that up to sound clever. And the temperature in that yard dropped about 10 degrees. Nobody argued with me. That's not how it works. Everybody smiled and said, "Yes, sir." And then, that evening, Jem was very quiet in the room and eventually said, "They are ashamed. You made them ashamed in front of each other." I never said another word about that build. 20 months, my money, my trade, and I stood there like a tourist. By month 20, I was in for roughly 70,000 Canadian all told. The house, the surgery, the monthly, the tuitions, the fiestas, the flights. I'd started with 210, a third of it gone, and a house I did not own, on land I could not own, titled to a diabetic 63-year-old woman in Negros, secured by a document I couldn't read. The cracks started somewhere around month 18, and I couldn't tell you the day. She was in Bacolod more than Angeles. Made sense. The build needed watching, her mother needed watching. 10 days there, 4 days back. Then 2 weeks there. Then I'd be in the apartment on my own, with the karaoke coming over the wall doing my 6 kilometers in the morning, and nothing at all in the afternoon. The house filled up before I ever slept a night in it. Rochelle moved in, then an aunt, then Jason, obviously, and a cousin with 2 kids. 7, 8 people in a house I paid for, and when I said something about it, mildly, I want to stress, very mildly, Jem looked at me like I'd asked her to put her mother out on the road. And she was right, too. That's what a house is for, over there. It's not a private object. It's a place the family lives. That was never hidden from me. I just had a Canadian idea in my head about what I was building, and nobody ever knew that idea existed, except me. And there was the name. I heard it in month 19. She was on the phone in the kitchen, Hiligaynon, and in the middle of it, Graham. Clear as anything, English name in the middle of a sentence I couldn't follow. I asked, casually. She said it's Tita Beth's employer. In Australia. She works for him. We're arranging something for Christmas. And that's a completely sensible answer. That is a normal thing to be true. Millions of Filipinos work abroad. Everyone's got a tita, working for somebody in Perth or Dubai or Hong Kong. I heard it twice more over the next 2 months. Never asked again. Then Rochelle brought up Manila 2019 a second time, at the site, and this time she caught herself halfway through and changed it to Iloilo. And Jem wasn't even in the room. I did the thing I always do, filed it. Filed it right next to the birth year on the PhilHealth form, and the cousin I'd never met, and the calls taken out on the balcony with the door shut. I've thought a lot about what I was doing in that stretch, and I think it's this. I wasn't ignoring it. I was storing it. Somewhere at the back I had a drawer with all of it in, and I knew exactly what was in that drawer, and I just never opened it. Because $70,000 of my life was sitting on the other side of that drawer, staying true. I did ask her one thing. Once. Month 20. In the apartment. Late. I asked her whether she'd have picked me if I'd been broke. And she didn't get angry, and she didn't cry. She just looked at me for a while and said, "Would you have picked me if I was ugly?" That's fair. That's completely fair. I've never had a good answer to it, and I don't have one now. I let it go. Told myself it was because it was a fair point. It wasn't. It was because she'd have answered the first question if I'd asked it again, and I did not want to hear it. The blessing was in June. Month 21. Father from the parish in the next barangay, holy water on the door frames, 40-odd people in the yard, a pig, a tent, San Miguel in a bin full of ice. Jem's cousin did My Way on the karaoke, and everybody cheered. They put me in a barong, cream one, stiff as a board, and Norma cried again and held my hands and blessed me, and everybody wanted a photograph with the Kano in front of his house. His house. Everybody kept saying that. Sir Murray's house. And I stood there in the middle of the yard, in that shirt with 40 people arranging themselves around me for the camera, in a place I'd paid every peso for and had no claim on whatsoever. And I remember thinking, and it just arrived. I didn't go looking for it. I'm not a guest here. I'm not the owner either. I'm the furniture. The salon came in July, month 22, and I want you to understand how it was put to me, because it's the cleverest thing that happened in 2 years, and I still don't know if anyone was being clever. Rochelle had done a course, hair and nails, some 6-month thing in Bacolod. There was a unit going on a street near the public market, pay 620,000. To take it on and fit it out. Chairs, dryers, mirrors, stock, 3 months of rent up front, 14,800 Canadian. And Jem sat on the end of the bed in Angeles and said, "After this, we don't need to ask you anymore." That was the pitch. Not help us. Not one more time. It was, this is the thing that ends it. Rochelle earns, Rochelle helps Mama, and you can stop. I have thought about that sentence more than any other sentence in this whole story, because I wanted it to be true so badly that I didn't examine it for 1 second. 22 months of being the tap, and here was somebody offering to turn the tap off, and all it cost was 15 grand. I sent it in 2 transfers. Checking account down to about 130. The salon opened in August. It's still open, as far as I know. Rochelle's got a Facebook page for it with the hours and everything. And then, in the 11 weeks after that, 2 tuitions, $24,000. A tricycle for a cousin who was going to do school runs with it, $95,000. That's about 2,300 Canadian. And I said yes to that one over the phone while I was standing in the kitchen looking at nothing. Barangay fiesta again, P18,000. And then an uncle I had met precisely once died, and a Filipino funeral is not a Canadian funeral. It's 9 days of a wake, with people playing cards in the room and eating, and a proper burial at the end, and that came to 55,000. Call it 200,000 in 11 weeks. Nearly $5,000, after the thing that was supposed to end it. I didn't say a word, not one word. I paid every one of them, and I never once said, "Hang on." Because here's what I'd worked out by then, without ever putting it in a sentence. If I said no, I'd find out what I actually was. And as long as I kept saying yes, I never had to. Now, Jason. Jason had asked his mother for $80,000 out of that salon money. Not from me. He'd never once asked me for anything. That boy, in 2 years. He'd asked Norma. He had an idea about buying rice at the mill in bulk and selling it out to the sari-saris in 3 barangays. And honestly, having heard it since, it wasn't a stupid idea. Norma said no. In front of people, apparently. His sister got 620,000 pesos for a salon, and he got nothing. And he was 24 and sitting on a step, and he'd sat on that step watching money flow past him for 2 solid years. October. Fiesta again. Different one. The barangay patron saint. Tent up in the road, sound system that could be heard in the next province, tables of pancit and lechon, and a bin of San Miguel and Red Horse in ice. I was outside by the wall of the house I'd paid for, having my 1 beer, when Jason came and sat down beside me. He was drunk, not staggering. That flat, steady drunk where somebody's been going at it for 4 hours and has arrived somewhere very calm. And he said it in English. Very plain English. Better English than he'd ever used with me. He said, "Do you know about Graham?" I said I'd heard the name. Tita Beth's employer. And he laughed. Not a nasty laugh, more like he was tired. And he said no. Graham is from Perth, Australia. He's been sending my sister $15,000 every month since before you. He still calls. She still talks to him. Mama knows. Rochelle knows. Everybody knows. Then he said the thing that took the legs out from under me, which was, "It's not a bad thing, sir. It's just in case. In case." I stood there with a warm beer and the sound system doing something at 90 decibels and a pig on a table 20 feet away, and I didn't feel anything at all for about 10 seconds. Then everything opened at once. I've heard men describe finding a phone, finding a message. That one moment where it all comes down. That's not what happened to me. What happened to me was that a drawer I'd kept shut for 2 years came open all by itself, and everything I'd put in there was still in there. All of it. In order. The calls on the balcony with the door shut, the cousin I never met in 24 months, the birth year on the PhilHealth form, Manila in 2019, which Rochelle said twice and corrected once, the name in the kitchen 3 times, 10 days in Bacolod, then 2 weeks, then 3. Not one of those things meant anything on its own. Every one of them had an answer, and I'd accepted every answer. Together, they'd been sitting there the whole time making a shape, and I'd just refused to look at the shape. I didn't say anything to Jason. I don't think I said anything at all. I remember he put his hand on my shoulder, which he'd never done, and went back to the tent. I waited 2 days. That's the thing about being the way I am. Debbie used to say I'd let a house burn down rather than raise my voice. 2 days, and in those 2 days I sat in that house and ate the food and said good morning to everybody, and said nothing. I asked her on the Tuesday night, upstairs, in the room they built for my daughter. I said, "Who is Graham?" And she didn't deny it. That's the part people don't expect. There was no scene. She sat down on the bed and put her hands in her lap, and she told me. Perth. Started in 2018. Met on Facebook through a cousin who worked there. He'd come over twice. He'd talked about a fiancé visa, and it never went anywhere, and it still hasn't, and he sends $15,000 a month, and she takes it, and she talks to him maybe once a fortnight. I asked if she loved him. She said no. I asked if she loved me, and she started crying, and she said yes, and I believe her. I want to say that clearly. 2 years on, I believe her. That's not me being soft. That's just what I think is true. Then she said the thing I've never been able to get around. She said, "Murray, you are 62. You have a sick heart. If you die, or if you go home, what happens to my mother, my sister, the little one in school? Who feeds them? You don't understand. I cannot be the person who has nothing to fall back on. I am not allowed to be that person. Not allowed." That's the words she used. And she wasn't wrong, was she? That's the hell of it. If I dropped dead in that house, my house, so-called, she'd have got the building and a diabetic mother and 4 people to feed, and no husband, no widow's pension, no Canadian anything, because we weren't married, and I'd never once brought it up either. Graham wasn't a boyfriend. Graham was insurance. I was the primary policy, and he was the backup. And she'd been paying the premiums on both of us for 2 years. I asked her one more thing. I asked whether her family had discussed it, whether there had ever been a conversation, her and Norma, about the 2 of us. She didn't answer that one. I sat there and did the arithmetic instead, because that's what I do. 61 when I landed, 63 by then. Roughly $103,000 gone in 24 months. The monthly, the surgery, the house, the salon, the tricycle, the funerals, the fiestas, the tuitions, the flights. 107 left out of 210. A house in Negros in Norma's name, with 8 people living in it. A lease I couldn't read. On land I could never own. In a country where I was still, after 2 years, on a tourist visa I'd extended 11 times. I didn't shout. I've never shouted in my life. I booked a flight on the Thursday from the phone, sitting on the front step at 6 in the morning while the roosters went. Manila, then Vancouver, then Toronto. Cost me $71,000 because it was 3 days out. I told her. I told Norma, who cried and held my hands and blessed me, same as the first day. I didn't tell anyone else. I didn't say goodbye to the neighbors or the woman at the sari-sari, or the kids at the basketball court. I just took the one suitcase I came with and went. Toronto in November, which, after 2 years of 32 degrees, is a genuine physical event. I came down the ramp at Pearson in a shirt and a pair of sandals, and I could see my breath before I got to baggage claim. I want to tell you about rock bottom because I think people expect it to be dramatic, and it isn't. It's admin. I got a 1-bedroom in Bowmanville because it was cheap and because I couldn't face Oshawa. $1,100 a month, above a dry cleaner's. I slept on a mattress on the floor for 3 weeks before I got round to buying a bed frame, and it wasn't a poverty thing. I had the money, I just could not summon up the interest. And I did the arithmetic, over and over, at 3 in the morning, on the back of a hydro bill. 210 in, 103 out over 24 months. 107 left, plus the union pension, plus CPP coming in a year and a bit. Which, and I want to be honest here because a lot of these stories end with a man ruined, and I wasn't ruined. I wasn't. 107 grand and a pension at 63 is not destitution. Plenty of the boys I worked with have less. But it wasn't the number that had me up at 3. It was that I'd done it while thinking I was being careful. That's what I couldn't get past. If I'd blown it in a casino, I'd have understood it. Instead, I'd spent 2 years being sensible in a language I couldn't speak. I didn't tell my daughter the figure, told her the relationship ended, told her I'd come home, and she said, "Sorry, Dad and I could hear she didn't know what to do with it." She's never known what to do with me. Fair enough, I built that. Ronnie called twice from Angeles. I didn't pick up either time. I'd like to say that was pride. It wasn't. Or not only. It was that he'd said the thing in the van 18 months earlier, you buying a girlfriend or buying a village. And he'd been right. And there is nothing on God's earth worse than a man who was right about you being kind about it. He texted after the second call. Just, no judgment here, bud. I still haven't answered. I will. I keep meaning to. February. I had my cardiology follow-up. Different fella this time. Lakeridge again. Same building. Same parking lot. Blood pressure 128/80. Cholesterol down where they wanted it. Weight down 26 pounds off where I'd been. He looked at the file and looked at me and said, "Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it." I sat in the truck afterwards. 40 minutes again, funny enough. Same lot, near enough the same spot. Because here's the joke. And it is a joke, and I've laughed at it more than once. The doctor told me to change my life or die. And I went and did exactly what he asked. I walked every morning. I cut the beer to nothing. I lost the weight. I cooked proper food instead of eating out of a microwave in a motel in Sarnia. Cost me $103,000 and a woman I loved. And it worked. Best shape I've been in since the 90s. Ontario winter, and I'm the healthiest bloke in the room. I went back to work in the spring. Not on the steel. 63, and I'm not climbing anything anymore. And I know it. But there's an outfit out of Whitby doing scaffold safety inspection for the construction sector, and they took me on 3 days a week. I walk sites. I look at tie patterns and base plates and toe boards, and I tell young fellas what's wrong with what they've built. And I need that. I need that more than I need the money. 38 years of being the man who knows the thing. And then 2 years of standing in a yard in Negros with my mouth shut while cousins put rebar in wrong. You have no idea what that does to a man until you get it back. 5 kilometers a day, still. Every day, even in February. Even in the dark. Down along the waterfront trail with a toque on. And I cook. Adobo, mostly. I've got it right now. Better than it ever was over there, if I'm honest. And I know exactly how that sounds. My daughter came in May. First time in 6 years. 3 days. She's got 2 kids I'd met twice. We didn't talk about any of this. She asked one question about the Philippines, and I gave her a short answer and she let it go, which I appreciated more than I could say. Last morning, at the door, she hugged me. She hasn't done that since she was maybe 19. So there's that. That's on the ledger, too, and I don't know how to price it. The house is still standing. Rochelle put photos up at Christmas. Norma's alive, still on the insulin, and there are, by my count, 9 people living in it now. New paint on the gate. A satellite dish that wasn't there when I left. I don't own it. I never owned it. I've got a lease I can't read, on land I could never legally hold, in a country I'd need a visa to go back to. Some fella at the Legion told me I should get a lawyer, and I said, what am I going to do? Sue a diabetic 64-year-old woman in Negros Occidental from a rented flat in Bowmanville? Made peace with it. Mostly. There are days. Gem texts on my birthday, and at Christmas, and once when there was a typhoon in Luzon, and she wanted to know if I'd seen it on the news, which I hadn't. I answer. Short answers, but I answer. And I haven't blocked her, and I couldn't tell you exactly why, and I'm not going to make up a reason to make myself sound wiser than I am. Now, what I'd tell you, if you're the man I was standing in a Canadian Tire parking lot scraping a windshield and looking at a photo of somebody's swimming pool, she was not a villain. I've had 2 years, and I'm as sure of that as I am of anything. She was the eldest daughter of a poor family in a country with no safety net, and everything she did, the support, the house, the salon, and yes, Graham in Perth, was her doing the job her whole culture handed her at 19 when her father died. She held her mother's hand for 9 hours in a corridor in Bacolod. That was real. She loved me. I think that was real too. And I wasn't a victim. I want that on the record even harder. Nobody drugged me. Nobody forged anything. I was a 61-year-old man with a bad heart and 200 grand and nothing to do with either. And I found a family that needed exactly what I had. And I mistook being needed for being chosen. That's the whole thing, right there. That's the sentence it took me $103,000 to arrive at. Being needed feels almost identical to being loved. Almost. And if you've been lonely long enough, you will not be able to tell them apart, and everybody around you will be far too polite to explain the difference. There was one question. Just the one. Not, is she lying? I asked that 100 times in 100 ways, and always got a satisfying answer. The question was, what am I actually being valued for? 2 years. Never asked it once. Not because I was stupid, because I knew roughly what the answer was, and as long as I didn't say it out loud, I got to keep the house and the woman, and the mornings and the adobo, and being Sir Murray. A man who won't ask that question doesn't avoid the answer. He just pays for it in installments. That's Murray Kowalchuk. 64 now, 3 days a week inspecting scaffold in Durham region, 5 kilometers a day, and healthier than the man who got on that plane. Here's what we'd ask you to sit with. Nobody in this story committed a crime. There was no fake profile, no forged hospital bill, no invented sister. The gallbladder was real. The land was really her mother's. The obligations Murray was absorbing are obligations millions of Filipino families carry without a foreigner anywhere in sight. And the woman carrying them was doing what her family, her church, and her circumstances had told her to do since she was 19 years old. And it still cost him $103,000. That's the hard part of these stories, and it's why we don't tell them as warnings about Filipino women. Genuine affection and financial calculation can live in the same person at the same time, and neither one cancels the other out. If you're waiting for a villain before you start asking questions, you'll be waiting a long time and paying the whole while. So, a few things, plainly. Land in the Philippines cannot be owned by you, and a lease you don't understand is not protection. It's paperwork. Money given once creates a category, not an event. And a woman with a real job, a real address, and a real family is not thereby a woman whose plans you understand. Ask the uncomfortable question early, while it's still cheap. What am I being valued for? Ask it out loud, and be prepared to hear an honest answer. Because an honest answer at month 3 costs you a plane ticket, and an honest answer at month 24 costs you the house. Thanks for spending this one with us. If Murray's story landed with you, or if you've got one of your own, we read everything that comes in. Take care of yourselves out there. This has been Inside the Philippines.